It seems like the majority of folks are in the room. Just to be mindful of our time, let's go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. Welcome again. Thank you for joining us for this webinar session this afternoon. My name is Fernando, and I'm your webinar host today. So I'm happy to offer you some support. So send me a message on the chat if you have any questions regarding your setup, if you're having issues with any aspect of the presentation. Audio, video connection, shoot me an email and I'm happy to troubleshoot it as best as I can. Please note that due to the current situation with COVID-19, Zoom is experiencing a lot of traffic. So if you have any lag or connection issues, we apologize in advance. It's just the servers being very impacted right now. So we're trying our very best to, give you the best content we possibly can. With that in mind, though, this webinar session is being recorded, so we will make that available for on-demand consumption roughly within 24 hours. So for anybody who experienced some issues during the session or would like to revisit the session, we will have that up on our YouTube channel later today to for you to rewatch that. Also, the resources tied into this session, such as the certificate of participation, the documents that the team today presenting have provided us with, everything's up on our website. So throughout the session today, I'll be sharing a link in the chat. So make sure you save that link because that has all the resources tied to this session. Plus, they're gonna make available some more resources later. So you wanna make sure you save that link to get access to all those goodies. Just so you know, an email reminder will go out after the session's over, reminding you of all of these things that I'm telling you. So don't rush taking notes. You'll get an email with all the links and all the information you need. We encourage your participation. However, we do have a limited time today on the air, so to speak. So send us your questions and we will follow up with you after the session. I believe that in the PowerPoint slides, they're gonna share their contact information so you can send your questions directly to the team today. But we want you to participate and send us your comments. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our topic, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 and how to provide real support for Black, Brown children and families. And our speakers today will be Jocelyn Tucker, Ijumaa Jordan, and Valerie Dickson. I hope you enjoyed this session and take it away, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando, and welcome everyone. I am going to share my screen. Yes, I am. I can do this. And we'll get started with our presentation. So let me get the slides up and yay. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Jocelyn Tucker and the three of our bios are on the website. So we're not going to take a lot of time introducing ourselves. So, and I'm glad I can only see Ijumaa and Valerie because we're just three girlfriends talking about what we talk about when we get together. In my head, that's what I'm thinking. So here are the presenters. Our bios and our contact information will be on the website. And hopefully you were able to receive the glossary of terms. And I hope you review them, either download them or have them at your have access to them so we can have a shared understanding of some of the complex terminology and definitions we'll be using throughout this webinar. This picture that you see started my journey into, or motivated me to approach Region 9 Head Start Association to do this webinar. So this was a meme I received from somebody, and we get many memes about what's happening with COVID, but the family is told, oh, just upload your work online and do the work and Zoom and use your iPad to do the lesson, and this is what home looks like, which makes it difficult for anyone to do what needs to be done if there's a lack of resources. And I called Ed and I said, Ed, I want to do this presentation, a webinar about the lack of resources that people are experiencing through this pandemic. And he said, oh, talk about this too. And I said, yes, I think I need to. And kind of this is where the whole thing got started. And during this presentation, I'd like to call out the leadership in our field because we need to do better. And I say we because I consider myself part of the leadership in the early education field. And leadership means administrators at the grantee level, administrators at the Head Start, at the delegate level, state funded programs, higher education. We all need to do better. And I'd like to start out with this quote, and I'd like to read it. It only take a minute, sorry. We're not telling the truth about leadership in our field, in our own field, and I believe it's debilitating us. The purpose is not to assess blame or ignite guilt, but to encourage a rigorous, honest look at leadership in our field for the purpose of its well-being. It may be hard to understand or appreciate why it's important to speak difficult truths in public. It may seem that all it does is expose dangerous weaknesses and thus make us more vulnerable. In fact, it does. However, it does something else that is less obvious, but more powerful. The truth unleashes incredible positive energy. And we're about to unleash a lot of positive energy today. This was said by Alice Walker Duff, who is one of the founders of the Crystal Stairs Resource and Referral Agency. She said this in 1997. And 20 years later, in our field, we're still experiencing the same types of issues. So hopefully this presentation, hopefully through this presentation, you'll have more questions than you did before this presentation, and that's a good thing. And hopefully it'll stimulate more conversation around this topic. Valerie?
All right, hello everybody, my name's Valerie. It's great to meet you virtually. And we are gonna have some difficult conversations. We're gonna talk about the things that we've been told we're not supposed to talk about. Specifically, we're gonna talk about racism and institutional, systemic, and individual racism and the impact it's having on our Black and Brown communities while we go through this COVID impact. So just for a baseline for us to start, some definitions. The first one really is about what oppression is. Oppression is when we have one group of people that can exert pressure on other groups of people because of power. So in order for oppression to occur, a group has to have power. With that power, then they get to dictate how things work. On an individual level, a lot of us are used to the idea of racism or one-on-one being one-on-one discrimination. These are the acts that we do one-on-one to each other. These are the words that we call each other. These are the things that are on our social media timelines and quite often in our stories and our news all the time. But personal racism is fed from institutional racism. And institutional racism is about the policies, the practices, and the procedures institutions have that allow access for some people and deny access or limit access for other people, specifically people of color. And at an institutional level, we'll see things like schools that sit there and will not allow certain people to apply to schools, or they limit those who can come into schools. In the workplace, it may be as simple as having an application that's not available in any language except for English, thereby negating the application process for people who speak something other than English. Institutional racism is also fed, though, by systemic racism. And systemic racism is based on the value system of a society. And that value system then feeds everything that we live, all of our policies, all of our procedures, all of the stereotypes and prejudices that we hold as individuals. Systemic racism is in every single aspect of a society. And here in America, it's in every single aspect of our society. Over the next little bit, really what I'm going to do is take us through the areas where systemic and institutional racism is impacting Black and Brown communities and why that is leading to the cause of death in our communities at a much higher rate than it is in other communities as well. So if we move on, what we want to look at here is the different identities, social identities that a person can hold. And all of us hold multiple identities throughout our lives all at once. So in each of these areas, we are either oppressed, meaning we have less power, or we have privilege and power in that group. The more places that we are oppressed, the more risks we have for having a harder life. So if we're looking at families in the Head Start program, Quite often, I was a child Head Start myself, so quite often we are looking at people of color. Our children are usually children of color. Our families are families of color. And we define that as every racial identity that is not white. So quite often people of color, people think of that as being Black and Latinx, absolutely. But it also includes our Asian, our Southeast Asian, our Central Asian groups, our Middle Eastern group, our North African groups as well. And we want to be mindful that this is also impacting those communities. Not at the same level that we're seeing in the Black and Latinx communities, but still significantly more so than it is in the white communities. We also want to look at our families' class level. Lower class and middle class level people are being impacted. We want to look at their gender identity. We want to look at their sexual orientation, their age, their ability levels. All of these things make people more susceptible to the impact of racism at a societal and an institutional level. And all of these things are leading factors in the impact that they are having in these communities when it comes to COVID. So let's talk a little bit about the history of systemic racism in America. And there's a lot. There's no way I could sit there and put all of this into a PowerPoint and do it in an hour. So this is a quick snapshot. There are a lot of resources if you want to learn more about this that we'll provide for you later. This is my passion, so I go a little in depth on it. I get a little nerdy about it, but if you're not, this kind of gives you an overview. At the founding of America, the founding of America started with the genocide of indigenous people. That was when the federal and state sanctioned acts to get rid of indigenous people in the name of manifest destiny. Here in California, our very first governor, Peter Hardman Burnett, said that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. It must be expected. That is a government official saying we will exterminate a whole people so that we can benefit. That is the first step of systemic racism. We then moved on to Black people, and many of us have studied this throughout history, or throughout our school history, and we know the impact that enslavement had at that time, but enslavement has continued to impact the Black community throughout the generations and continues to impact us as well. While Black people were being enslaved in the south part of America, here on the West Coast, we were colonizing the Latinx people that were indigenous to California, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, erasing their language, erasing their culture, erasing their religions. That was just as detrimental to the Latinx community as enslavement was to the Black community. And shortly after emancipation, we issued the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which denied Chinese immigration for 10 years and prevented Chinese people from being able to become citizens. The fear was that Chinese people were going to take jobs from real Americans and that they would work for less pay. Strangely enough, almost 200 years later, we hear echoes of that now when we're talking about our Latinx communities, and we're talking about our Syrian immigrants, and we're talking about our immigrants that are coming from Africa as well. This act was renewed in 1892, was made permanent in 1902, and we didn't repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act until World War II began, and we needed China as an ally. That's systemic. All of this continued to happen while Jim Crow and segregation was happening here in America. And segregation, we are all very familiar with the idea that Black people were not allowed to live in neighborhoods with other white people. We were not allowed access to the same education, the same medical care. We were not allowed access to places of worship, shopping, eating. But this didn't just affect Black folks. This also affected Latinx people and Asian people and indigenous people. All of us were excluded and segregated. And that segregation has a lasting impact to today and has a lot to do with where we live and what access to resources we have at this point in time. It also allowed for disenfranchisement of voting, which is a huge factor because if we remember, oppression happens when you have power. If we don't have the right to vote, we do not have the right to have power. So we want to be mindful of how that impacted us. From the Jim Crow segregation, it took over 20 years for us to overturn those laws, 20 years that we fought to overturn segregation laws through civil rights. And that ended in 1968 on a legal level, but the impact is still impacting us all the time. During World War II, we had segregation in the military. Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian people were segregated to specific troops that were for their race only. The big impact here is after the war, the GI Bill was instituted, and that was supposed to give us access to college and home loans. Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian people did not have access to the GI Bill. That means there's a whole generation that did not get to go to college on America's dime, a whole generation that did not get to buy homes on America's dime. while white folks that were in the military did. My grandfather was able to buy a house as a white man following the GI Bill. That is the house that he raised my five family members, my mother and her siblings in, at a very low price. My grandfather on my father's side, as a Black man, was not allowed to buy that house. And you can see the difference to this day in the way both sides of my family have been able to have access to power and generational wealth. During World War II, we also had the internment of Japanese Americans, 3 years where over 120,000 Japanese people were interred here in America against their wishes. That means lost access to their homes and their businesses. Following World War II, when they were allowed out of the internment camps, they did not get their homes back. They did not get their businesses back. That's generational wealth that is gone and was not recovered. Even though there was reparations for Japanese Americans, it's still only a token of what they should have gotten, and it doesn't address, of course, reparations in the Black community or the Latinx community that we're still waiting on. After World War II, there was this huge housing boom. Everybody wanted to buy houses. We were told that was the American dream. So people of color went out to buy houses just like everybody else did. But there was this issue of redlining, which was a restriction and limitation and blocking of loans, mortgages, insurance to communities based on the race of the applicant. There were actual maps that drew red lines around and said, this is a hazardous area, therefore, only Black people and Latinx people can live in this neighborhood. To this day, if you go into a home deed for a house here in California that was built before 1968, in the CCRs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, you can see the actual words that state that they will not sit there and sell a home to Negroes, Latinx, or Asian people. Those lines have been crossed out, but they are still part of the legal document. There is a record there. For those of you who may own homes that were built before 1968, take a look at your CCRs. See who was allowed to buy your home prior to 1968. Was it somebody that shared your racial identity? Or are you the first possibly to be able to buy in that neighborhood? Another form of systemic racism is our prison pipeline, and it starts in preschool. The audience that you're dealing with, the children that you're dealing with are already being targeted as being on the line to prison. This can be the criminalization of Black and brown children in preschool, being identified as juvenile delinquents or needing special ed at a certain level because they are behaving in the way that 2- and 3-year-olds do. They are bouncing around, they are not paying attention, they are not listening, they're doing what 2- and 3-year-olds do, but our Black and brown children are being labeled as dysfunctional, disruptive, delinquent, and that starts in preschool, takes us all through elementary, and by the time they're in middle school, we already see the dropout rates that are occurring in Black and brown communities. This is not accidental. This is part of the value system that we have grown up with here in this country. And finally, our economic inequity. Due to enslavement and colonization, we have whole entire generations of Black and Latinx people that were not paid for the labor that they did. The structure of our country was built upon their labor, and yet the economic benefits of that did not come back into those communities. And we move into segregation, we move into Jim Crow, and even into today, we look at subsistence pay within the Black and brown communities and within people of color communities, where we still hold the majority of major or minimum wage jobs. According to a report by the New York City Comptroller's Office in March of this year, 70%, more than 70% of New York City's essential workers are Black, Latinx, and Asian people. They are on the front lines of this COVID disease, and they are being paid minimum wage. These are not the doctors that we're talking about. These aren't even necessarily the nurses, even though there are a number of us that are in the nursing field. But these are the Uber drivers that are delivering groceries to people. These are the bus drivers. These are the people cleaning up in the hospital after the COVID patient has passed away, and they're exposed to COVID-19, yet they do not have vacation pay, they do not have sick leave if they get sick. So this is some of the systemic racism that has occurred here in America. We move on, we'll talk specifically a little bit about the medical racism in our community and how medical racism has impacted us as well. Because of systemic racism, people of color have had limited or no access to preventative or emergency medical care, meaning that our culture has been a culture of self-care. We take care of ourselves within our community. We listen to grandma when she sits there and tells us that this is what we need to do. You know, whether that's the Vicks Vapor Rub on our chest, the mustard plaster, those are the things that grandma told us work, and that's what we did because going to the hospital was not always an option for us. And if we were able to go to a hospital, quite often we were refused medical care, or we were told we had to wait. And sometimes that waiting lasted until we passed away, until we died there in that medical facility. So that has been the legacy for people of color in America when it comes to medical care. Some more of the more egregious things that have happened because of medical racism is the Tuskegee experiment, which was between 1932 and 1972, a 40-year experiment where over 600 Black men, primarily sharecroppers in Alabama, were told that they were going to receive free medical care due to syphilis. And they would be able to get free medical care, free meals, and most importantly, free burial insurance for participating in this case. 399 of those men had syphilis, 200 did not. They were given information on the treatments that they were going to be given, any potential side effects or risks. And during the 40-year experiment, none of the men received any care for syphilis. Even when they found out that penicillin did cure syphilis, none of the men received penicillin, but they did get free burial insurance from the United States government. Right as that study was ending in 1972, in 1970, we had forced sterilization of Black, Brown, and Indigenous women that was headed by the Indian Health Service and by Medicaid. In this case, 25% of Indigenous women were sterilized against their will, in addition to Black and Latinx women as well. This was based on the belief that there was an increase in welfare in these communities because Black, Latinx, and Indigenous women were engaging in unsafe sex practices and were not sitting there making sure that they didn't get pregnant. So the answer from the United States government was to sterilize the women against their wish. These are some of the things that our communities have dealt with throughout the history of America and our medical racism. So we have to wonder why there is maybe some concern about in our communities around medical care and some doubt about COVID. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the myths in the medical community about Black and Latinx people. If we want to move on to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So these are a few studies that have been done just in the last couple of years. In 2016, University of Virginia found that half of the medical students believed in phony biological differences between Black and white people, specifically that Black people's blood coagulates more quickly than whites, that Blacks age more slowly than whites, and that our nerve endings are less sensitive than whites. This is going to go ahead and tie into COVID here very shortly, specifically the belief about our blood coagulating more quickly than whites, and the belief then of the idea that Black people can't get COVID. That is what myth that we heard early on at the beginning of this pandemic. Additionally, we've also heard that in 2012, Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine found that doctors were not taking as much time with patients as they do with white patients. Therefore, Black patients felt that they were not being heard, and because they felt they weren't being heard, they were less likely to come back to the doctor for follow-up care. That's also critical. We are hearing that the reason that COVID is hitting our community so much is because we don't listen to doctors. The studies show the doctors aren't listening to us. Therefore, we don't go back to the doctor because why am I going to go talk to somebody who's not even listening to me when I tell them what my symptoms are in the first place? We also know that Black patients with renal failure, cardiac disease, and cancer are less likely to be prescribed a care plan for cure as opposed to a palliative plan, meaning that white patients that have these diseases are given a plan to cure the disease. Black and Latinx patients that have these diseases are told you're going to have to live with it. Here's your plan for how you live with it until it kills you. This is regardless of our medical insurance or our ability to pay. So this exceeds class issues. This is just based solely on racial identities and the fact that we are being told that we have to suffer. This comes in place because there is a stigma that being Black and being brown in America means suffering. Our medical community has bought into this, and unfortunately, sometimes we've bought into this as well, and we want to challenge that idea. We've also found that there are multiple studies that Black Americans are 20% more likely to suffer from psychological issues than white folks. The reason for this is because of systemic and institutional racism. chronic underemployment or unemployment, generational trauma from racism, ongoing poverty, environmental hazards in our neighborhood, all of this is going to take a strain on our mental health. And that's why we see the mental health issues in our community. And then we also have to look at what access do we have to mental health care. So we want to be mindful of how these myths in the medical community are coming across to us, because this is going to sit there and talk a little bit about how we engage with the medical community, specifically as we're looking at COVID-19. So let's talk a little bit about some of the myths in our community about medical care. So our next slide tells us a little bit about some of the myths within the Black and Brown community. So I know that one of the things I heard growing up quite often, oops, looks like we skipped ahead a little bit. There was just a second, back a couple there. There we are. All right. So I know I grew up hearing hospitals are where you go to die. This goes back to that earlier issue that we have with systemic or racism in medical field, which is the reality is, as a Black and Brown person, my grandmother's generation, hospitals is where you went to die. As a Black and Brown person, you went to the hospital for medical care, you were placed in a hospital, and you were left there until you died. So in Black and Latinx communities and Black and Brown communities, we don't go to the hospital because the only time we come out of them was in body bags. So we don't go until we are at a crisis. We are seeing that happen with COVID. We are seeing in the Black and Brown communities that we are not going to the doctor when we get the first signs of COVID because we don't believe we're going to be listened to. We have legacy to prove that. And because we don't trust that we're going to get care that will actually cure us, as opposed to sit there and tell us to just live with it until we get to a place where we no longer can. We've also been told Black don't crack, right? And this usually applies to our beauty, right? We're sitting there proud of that. We know age is fast. This is in Black and Brown communities across the people of color spectrum and everything else. And while there is some vanity in that and some pride in that, there's also a stigma that goes along with that. Even if we are aging, we are suffering, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about our suffering. We don't talk to each other about it, and we don't talk to the medical professions about it. So when we do see the doctor and the doctor asks how are we, we're like, oh, I'm fine. We don't mention the hypertension. We don't mention the fact that we're still having problems, that our medication is not addressing the diabetes, because we're supposed to just suck it up and hold it. That hurts us more than anybody. And it's being used against us right now in COVID because we're hearing from our Attorney General of America that the reason Black and Brown people are suffering is because grandmama has diabetes and because we're not listening and we're not doing what we need to. And it's because we have asthma, but we're not asking, why do we have asthma at the higher rates that we do? Environmental racism. Why do we have high blood pressure? Stress. Why do we have diabetes? Food deserts. These are all institutional systemic reasons that we have this. And finally, that final myth within our community is about ourselves is our super strength. I know in my family, this is the thing that got me through. If you can't fix it, don't whine about it. And girl, just suck it up. You know, we're strong. So we take pride in that. It's a badge of honor for us. And I'm not saying we should be ashamed of it, but it does prevent us from getting the help we need. Medical help, psychiatric help, counseling help, being able to reach out to community and sit there and say, if I can't go to the doctor, can I at least talk to my sister friends about, no, girl, I'm not okay. I'm not okay right now. You know, I put the face on, but reality is, no, I'm struggling. My blood pressure is high and I can't afford my medication right now because that stimulus check is only going to cover so much, right? That stimulus check is my rent and my food for my kids. So my blood pressure medication got put off this month. These are some of the myths that are happening in our community around medical care. And we need to be mindful of those because that's what's now leading us into our next slide and the myths that we're hearing about Black and Brown communities and COVID. First one, melanated people can't get COVID-19, right? So where did this even begin coming up with? And I'm the mother of three. I've got 3 kids, and my daughter, when this first came out, she said, Mom, nobody in Africa is getting it. She goes, so we might have to deal with racism, but Black folks don't have to deal with COVID. And there was a small part of me that wanted to believe that was true. It's like, okay, do we get a small win? But it's not true. Here's the facts. That myth arose because a Cameroonian student who was living in China contracted the disease and he recovered. 2 international websites attributed his recovery to, quote, his Black skin and antibodies of a Black are 3 times stronger, more powerful, and resistant than that of a white. That was from 2 international websites. The stereotypes about Black folks is just rampant in that quote. The truth is there's no scientific evidence that African blood composition prevents Africans from contracting the coronavirus. Melanated people can and are getting COVID-19. Melanated people can and are dying from COVID-19. We are not immune because of our skin, as much as we would like that to be true. It's not. Second, COVID-19 can't survive in hot climates like in Africa, South America, the Caribbean, and the southern states of America. So we just have to wait for summer and the virus itself will die out. Well, I know here in California, it's been hot the last couple of days, right? We're getting pushing close to 100 degrees, but the reality is that's not true. This arose because there was an initial research project that said temperature might have a role in killing the virus off. However, the research project was not peer-reviewed or verified, and the World Health Organization states that hot and humid countries are having COVID-19, and COVID-19 has been found in every single continent in America, in the world, except for Antarctica. And that is still waiting to be seen if that changes. So let's be clear, heat does not kill COVID. Outside temperature is not going to kill it. The summer months will come and COVID-19 will still be here. We need to be aware of that. Moving on to the other slide. These are the ones that I'm hearing a lot in our community. This has to do with holistic and home remedy cares. Again, remember that culture within our communities that we take care of ourselves. We take care of our medicine at home. So here are some things we're being told. Drink hot water for 10 days. Again, this goes back to the idea of that temperature is going to kill COVID, right?
With lemon.
Huh?
With lemon.
Drink lemon, yes, as Jocelyn said, we need hot water with some lemon in it. I've heard a little bit of black pepper will add to that. Drink that down. Temperature is not going to do it. The temperature it would be too dangerous for humans to consume. So temperature and hot water is not going to cure it. And fever is a sign of COVID, not a sign that we are fighting it off. It means that our bodies are struggling because of the COVID. 2, eucalyptus oil, zinc supplements, ginger ale, vitamin C, essential oils, all those things that can prevent and cure COVID. Now, here's the thing. We know that essential oils and minerals and vitamins do help build our immune system. And we do know a strong immune system does help us be less at risk for COVID. So there is some rationale in that, right? We do know that vitamin C fights off pathogens. We do know that ginger is used quite often to sit there and fight off infections. But what we do also know is that while there are studies going on around vitamin C specifically about if it helps, none of the trials have been conclusive at this point in time. And there's no scientific or medical treatment or proof that these treatments will cure COVID-19. If they make you feel psychologically better, drink your lemon water, drink your ginger tea, go ahead and put that essential oil on you. Absolutely, I'm all for that. But it's not going to prevent or cure COVID-19. But if it makes you feel mentally, I'm for that, right? But let's be clear, it's not going to take care of our physical need. The other one, spraying rubbing alcohol and chlorine or ingesting bleach just within the last couple of days, or if you're not going to ingest the bleach, then injecting disinfectants into our bloodstreams will take care of it. Now, this is quasi-scientifically rational because we know alcohol and disinfectants have been proven to kill COVID, right? We know that. And we know that COVID enters through our mucous membranes, our nose, our eyes, our throats. So therefore, the logic is that if you put the bleach and the chlorine in your eyes, nose, and throats, you've killed off the COVID. No, yes, let's be clear here. Lysol, rubbing alcohol, chlorine, bleach, all work beautifully on hard surfaces, not human surfaces. Bleach your floors, wipe down your walls, spray your countertops, all of that, but leave it out of your body. It's not going to help. By the time COVID is in your body, none of these are going to help you. And the reality is all of these, if they are taken within your body, are harmful and potentially deadly. So go ahead and disinfect the hard surfaces of your house. Tell your family members, tell your friends to go ahead and do that, but leave the solutions outside of the human body. Okay.
Drinking and vodka. What about that one?
Yes, finally, my favorite one, and especially when we hear where this one came from. So if you drink vodka, it will kill the virus.
Yes.
Here's our story where the vodka came from. The story is
from P. Diddy, right?
No. Better. A golfing buddy of the man that lives in the White House right now I don't say his name, but the man that's living up in the White House right now, his golfing buddy went online and tweeted, and I will quote his exact words, you know, you just drink one of these a day, you know, sippy, a little McDonald's Coke, Diet Coke mixed with vodka, you know, wash it down pretty good, never have a hangover. And the truth is, that's the way you kill this coronavirus, I believe. So the idea of drinking vodka to cure COVID came from the friend of the man living in the White House, the president of the United States. His friend says, if you have Diet Coke and vodka every day, you will get rid of COVID. The World Health Organization says consuming alcohol will not destroy the COVID virus, and its consumption is likely to increase the health risks if a person becomes infected with the virus. Alcohol will increase the risks, not decrease. So leave your vodka off to the side.
Darn it.
If you want to have that and you don't have COVID and that's your coping mechanism, I'm not here to say we're all over the age of 21, but do not sit there and think that your vodka is going to cure COVID. It's not. We need to be very mindful of where we're getting our information and what information we're sharing with each other and our communities when it comes to COVID-19. Because of institutional racism, because of systemic racism, there's a lot of misinformation and mistrust between our communities and medical communities. But keep in mind, we have to sit there and find truth out there. And the truth is out there. We have reliable resources to go to. At the end of our presentation, we will give you a list of a number of places that you can get information about medical care, about health when it comes to COVID. Off the top of my head, I would tell you the World Health Organization is a valid place to go and look for information. And the Center for Disease Control is also a valid place to go. They have very intense medically dense documents there, but they also have some really easy reads for a layperson. I have no medical background. It's really easy to go in there and get that information. So do your research. Even when you do research, check it again. If you can't find it verified in more than 2 or 3 valid places, question it. I would also challenge that Twitter, Google, Gmail, Facebook, these are not valid places for information. You may find a link in there, and I found some of my information through those places too, but click on the link, go to the original source. Is it coming from a reputable place of information? Is it coming from a school of medicine? Is it coming from an organization that has a long history of doing medical research? If it does, then cautiously believe it, but again, double check that information. Let's move on to the final slide before we move on to ECE. What can I do about systemic and institutional racism, especially as it's applying to COVID? First thing, educate yourself. Learn more about how racism impacts the families you're dealing with, your family, and you. Racism is not just a people of color issue. It affects all of us, all races. We are all impacted because of systemic racism. It damages all of us, and it's going to take all of us to sit there and address this. So watch videos, read, unlearn, as opposed to learn, unlearn, question things beyond the norm. What isn't being said? Who isn't being heard? That's how we go about creating equity. Also, actively listen. Don't try to fix things for your families. Don't try to save them. We are never going to be able to overturn systemic racism in one day, in one conversation. But if you enter into your conversations with an open mind and an open heart and recognize that all of us live very different experiences and that America looks very different for each of us because of our social identities, because of our race and our age and our class and our ability and our sexual orientation and our nationality and our language. America is a very different place for each of us. If you can actively listen for people to tell you where and how institutional and systemic racism is impacting them, then you have a chance to sit there and maybe making some differences by advocating and using your voice. What resources can you connect your families with? What spaces are you in that your families cannot be in? When you are in a space that your families are not in, speak up for things that are detrimental to those communities. Speak up because their voices aren't there. Use your privilege and your power to make a difference in the lives of the people who are not in that space at that time. And then practice self-care for yourself and for your loved ones and for your families. We cannot take care of other people if we do not take care of ourselves. So I know I've spent a lot of time reading about the death rate in the Black and Brown community due to COVID, and it tears me apart. And I don't want to turn away from it because I feel like we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention. But I also know there gets to a place where if I'm looking at it so much, I can't be there for the Black and brown children in my family right now. So take care of yourself. It is okay to turn the computer off, to log off for a little bit, to go and play with your children. And we're going to talk about play and the importance of that soon. But take care of yourself so that you can go back the next day and advocate for your families. And then we talked a little bit about this, sharing legitimate resources again. Make sure you're looking for real information and you're sharing it. If you're not sure if it's legitimate, preface your statement with that. I'm not sure if this is legitimate. This is what I've heard. And then look together. And finally, let's be realistic. Don't promise what you can't deliver. We're not going to sit there and stop families from dealing with institutional and systemic racism, but you can lessen the burden of it by following these steps. Educating yourself, using legitimate resources and data, taking care of yourselves, taking care of each other, actively listening and speaking up. That is how we start fighting and continue to fight systemic and institutional racism, especially as COVID is showing us it's very much a realistic part of our lives every day. What I want to do now is I want to turn it over to Ms. Ijumaa, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about what does this all have to do with early childhood education in the first place, right? Thank you all.
Yes. Thank you, Valerie. That was really powerful and a lot of truth. And I appreciate that sharing, Valerie, and anchoring us in the reality of racism institutionally, systematically, and how people are affected personally. Sometimes when we hear all the stats and we hear this information, as early childhood educators, sometimes we think, well, what does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with ECE? Jocelyn, can you click? This quote is from Nicole Hannah Jones. When it comes to Black kids, our schools are not broken, but operating as designed. It's important. It's important that we understand that ECE is based in systemic and institutional racism, and that is reproducing those systems of oppression, and that is our obligation, is our ethical duty to push back against that and to offer children, Black and brown children, the education that they deserve. And if we don't do anything, if we're passive, then nothing changes and nothing gets done, and children continue to be harmed by the educational system. So we're not outside of the inequities, we're not outside of systematic and institutional, that in our systems that we are participating in currently, that it's important to know that we have the ethical obligation to make sure that we are not reproducing the inequality, that early care and education is part of these systems. Next slide. And so thinking about in early education, Valerie already talked about the preschool to prison pipeline, thinking about program policies that uphold white dominant cultural norms, thinking about, she spoke about special education, about children being labeled early on for regular behavior that we expect, developmentally appropriate behavior. So when we think about how we create policies and practices, that where we need to look at where we are just reproducing the inequality, that we're reproducing the racism, and that we understand that. And one of the things that we have to know in early education, one of our obligations, to know that play is a right of childhood, that all children deserve play, that they have an ability to be themselves, enjoy their childhood, and that our role is to advocate for children's play and to advocate for their right. That is not just a break from learning, that is not just a break from life, that is part of their life and it's their right to have it, and it's our obligation to make sure that they have it. Next slide. And when I talk about play, I make sure that it has these essential characteristics, that it's intrinsically motivated, that it's self-chosen and freely chosen, that it's pleasurable, that there's joy and happiness attached to it, that it's non-literal, that it's imaginative, and that children are actively engaging in that. that all 5 of these essential characteristics need to be taking place, and that it's our job to make sure that that's happening in the classroom and supporting families so that can happen at home. And when we talk about play and equity, we want to make sure that children have access to relationships, that they have access to material, that they have access to space, and they have access to time. A lot of times when I go as an early childhood consultant, when I go into centers, I might see that children don't have a lot of quote unquote playtime, that there's a lot of direct instruction, that if you go into neighborhoods or you go look in play yards, that the spaces are cramped, that there's not a lot of space to even move around. And we think that we just want to have children sit or have very structured ways of interacting with space. But if you look in neighborhoods, when Valerie talked about redlining, in those neighborhoods, there's not a lot of nature, that there's not a lot of parks, there's not a lot of place for recreation. And that is because of systematic and institutional racism, and that's on purpose.
The McDonald's play place,
yeah,
is the only play area.
That in some communities, especially ones that are impacted with and are in food deserts, that the McDonald's play space is the only place where children can actually play and interact with each other. That there's an abundance of those balls and slides.
If they have money to go to McDonald's, if you have McDonald's money.
If you have McDonald's.
Got McDonald's money, so we don't get food and we don't get play.
Yeah.
Right. So all of those things are impacting children's access to play. And we need to make sure that we understand how class, how race is all impacting that. And thinking about what materials, I think the default is thinking about that all children live in this middle class wonderland, and that they have paint, or they have their own room, that they have pencils and pens and crayons, that they have dolls and trucks and building materials. But that's not true for all families and all children. Like thinking about the picture that Jocelyn showed in the beginning, that there might be limited space in their living situation, that there might not be a lot or abundance. They do have something, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but to remember that we can't assume that everyone has that they have a playroom, that they have their own bedroom, that they have access to the materials that they might have in early childhood programs. And I think that it's important that what we do have is that we have relationships, that we have each other, and that's the place to start. So even if you try to gather and want to send packets and do that, because people don't have internet access, but remember that our focus should be relationships, that starting with who we are in our homes with, about families playing together, that families should be part of the play that children are being able to engage in, and children should have some access to, if they need to like playing by themselves or playing with their siblings. But making sure that if we're advocating for play, that is equitable and they have the relationships, the material, the space, and the time that they need. Next slide. And so what we know is that COVID-19 has amplified the current inequity in our early care and education system. Like I said, that the default and what's been promoted is that, oh, we'll have Zoom circle time, but everyone doesn't have internet. Oh, we'll send out packets, or we'll send out packets to families. What about families that are underhoused? What about families that maybe they don't live in a place where they can receive mail? So thinking about what families actually have and not assuming that they have everything that you think that they might. And that the deaths and the stress that they're under, like we have to be realistic that even if they do have internet, that they might not be able to be on that Zoom call or have their children participate because of the stress. There might be job loss. And so Valerie mentioned that it's important to be realistic because these inequities are showing more and are amplified. So we have to take that in consideration when we start to make a plan about having children play and having children be in care in their homes. Next slide. And so one of the myths when Jocelyn and Valerie and I first started talking is that Black families, Indigenous families, and families of color don't want play, that they want worksheets. That it's important that we understand that is not just about the play and the worksheets. Like families are concerned about children's success, that even if they don't articulate that their child is going to be impacted by a racist ECE system, a racist K-12 system, that they want their child to succeed. And so it's important that we not shame or think families are just not, are silly or unknowledgeable about play, but actually talk about how children grow and develop and learn through play. And that's what's going to help them be successful in a way that worksheets will be limited. That worksheets might decrease the children's love for play and learning. And so it's important that we not shame families when they start to tell us what they want and need. And even in our advocacy, that play shouldn't be an either or, that it should be a yes and.
Families just want their kids to be good, to be successful, and because schools didn't help us, we push education harder. That's part of the systemic, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we have made it through and it wasn't easy.
So we just push.
It wasn't easy being a Black girl, and especially someone that wanted a lot of information, that was very inquisitive. So it's important that we understand that that's where those families are coming from, that they aren't negating play because they're silly or they're unknowledgeable, that they really want their children to have the best education and to be successful.
And I think we've done a poor job in educating families as a field, because a lot of families remember school as the last time they were in school, which was probably high school or middle school, sitting in rows of chairs being lectured to by a teacher. And a lot of people in our field, we're still trying to convince our field the importance of play.
Yes.
So when we're still trying to convince our field about how important play is, then what chance do families have in believing play is important?
Correct. So again, our advocating for play, that we want to focus on and begin with relationships and work with the space, time, and materials that family have at present. So Jocelyn is going to talk more about what that looks like in real life. And so when we do have play, thinking about what might come up and what parents might report is that there's more play around death, about sickness, about contagion. One of my friend's children, they play this game, Who Got the Rona? And they run around and tag each other like, you got the Rona.
Forget the cooties, it's Rona now.
Yeah, like it used to be the cooties when I was coming up, but now it's Who Got the Rona. So now, and there's play around isolation, separation, around medical play, and an increase around superhero play and rescuing and saving. So it's going to be important that we support, even if they make us uncomfortable, and these are tender topics, that we allow children to process what's going on. They might not know, they might not be watching the news, but they can feel the stress. They know something's different. They haven't been in their program. They haven't seen their teachers. They haven't seen their friends. So they know something is going on. They've heard about COVID-19. And so these play themes are helping them process what's going on. And it's important as the adults in their lives that we support that, and get support for us when we feel uncomfortable about that.
Yes.
I like that. Who got the Rona?
Who got the Rona? So I'm gonna give it over to you, Jocelyn. I just looked at the clock. We have 8 minutes.
Okay, I can do it. I can do that 8 minutes. That's fine. That's all I need. Actually, I was not going to say anything because of the powerhouses I'm co-presenting with. I said, I don't need to say anything because you ladies are so powerful in your message and what you're saying. But I'll go through mine just very quickly. Real support. So Ijumaa already talked about relationship. Talk, read, and sing. I know it's corny. It's the first 5 commercial, but you don't have to have money to talk. You don't have to have money to sing. Read. Okay, if you don't have a book or you can't read, make up a story. In the days we used to make up stories and tell children about our experiences and in our lives. You can read the newspaper, a cereal box, anything with print at your home can be read or can be talked about, the letters on the cereal box. So these are things that can be done that are very simple, very easy to do with things that families have in their home. And play. In our field, we've got to do better in advocating for play and explaining the importance of play. And we talk about parents and not wanting to play, and I reiterate, that's our fault. We haven't done a great job in explaining to society how important play is. So I look at the Head Start Early Learning Outcome Framework, which is a structure that looks at different areas and categories where children learn. So approaches to learning, how to go about beginning to learn and do and structure in a way that you're preparing your child for school. Establish a routine, any routine. Have the child help you in establishing the routine. It can be when we wake up, this is what we do first. And then we go and we have breakfast. And after breakfast, we read a story. And after the story, we go outside. Whatever the routine is, have a routine and do it every day. Maybe you don't have a routine for the entire day. Maybe you start with a bedtime routine. Wash up, brush your teeth, read a story, and then bedtime. Maybe you start with a morning routine, but some kind of routine that helps. Have the child help in cleaning up. Maybe if your child is 1 or 2, you have them help clean up where you're talking about what you're doing. That can be getting them in the path to structure and routine, and that helps them. Social emotional development, positive interactions are number 1, and social stories. We used to tell social stories about different lessons in our community. In the African tradition, there was Anansi the spider, and this spider got into all kind of trouble. And this was a story. A lot of the books we read to children today come from social stories that our grandparents and our great-grandparents told us hundreds of years ago, and somebody turned it into a book. So make up a story of an incident about a little girl who never made up her bed and what happened to her. The covers got all messed up, and whatever the story is or whatever the lesson you're trying to teach your child, make a story about it that happens to somebody else, never that child, and have them talk to you about what happened in that and what we could do better. Cognition, and that is the thought process and how the brain thinks. Math activities, you wash your clothes, the child matches the socks. That's a math activity. Count the number of shoes in the house and collect all the shoes and separate them and have the child put the shoes together with their matching shoes. Compare the amounts of cereal. I have a bowl of Cheerios. Who has more? How do you know it's more? Let's count the Cheerios. Those are math activities. Melting ice. Get an ice cube from the freezer and put it outside. How many seconds do you think it's going to take that ice cube to melt? Or put it in the refrigerator. Where did it melt faster? Outside in the refrigerator. And why? And my favorite that my granddaughter reminded me of, the I Spy with my little eye. So what I Spy, instead of, I saw a cute video of dad with his child, and they were doing school. at home. And so he had a child sitting down in a chair, and he had these flashcards, and he was saying, what color is this? And the child must have been 3. And she went through the first couple of them, and then she started squirming, and then she started looking around, and the dad was, what color? Look, what color? So he was getting frustrated. She was getting frustrated. And learning should be fun. Everybody should be having a good time. Instead of, what color is this? And flashcards, teach a parent, I spy with my little eye something that's green. And you play that game with your child. Or, let's go into the closet. The first one that finds something red wins the game. Ready, go. Or let's go into the kitchen. The first one that finds a circle, or I spy with my little eyes something that's green, or something that's a square, or a circle, or a triangle. Those games are learning for your child. It's a game and it's fun. You can have fun. The child should be having fun also. Perceptual, motor, and physical development. Put on some music and then turn it off, and everybody freeze. Those are movement. Those are self-regulation skills, knowing when to stop. Hip hop on 1 foot, 2 feet, hop on no feet. I did that with my grandkids. Hop on no feet now. What? We can't do that. That's crazy. So, and then the insulting one, I told my 4-year-old granddaughter, let's have a wheelbarrow race. A wheelbarrow? What is that? I told Ijumaa and Valerie, I felt like my grandmother talking about the Victrola back in the 1800s. Wheelbarrow, so you hold the child's feet and they run on their hands. Mud pies, what happened to those? That was my favorite activity as a kid, was turning my bicycle upside down, putting grass in it, and making ice cream in my bike. So, I mean, even if you don't have a bike, a mud pie, if you can afford Play-Doh or clay, put some water and mud and do the fine motor and manipulate it and let it dry and make shapes. Those are activities that develop your child's skills. And then language. Number 1 activity, best, just talk. I was going to show the video of the dad having the conversation with the little boy. You can see it. We don't have time. I know we're out of time, but the best thing you can do with your child, and the easiest and the cheapest thing, just talk to them and have conversations. Conversations, not interrogations. What color is this? What size is this? What shape is this? What does this look like? Where does this, but conversations where you go back and forth and talk about things that you're doing and you're seeing. I wanted to end with this quote from one of my favorite speakers, Rita Pearson. Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insights that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it's not impossible. We can do this. We are educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you, Fernando. Thank you for allowing us to speak. Thank you, Ijumaa and Valerie, for joining me. This was great. We need a few more hours, Fernando, but since you're cutting us off, we'll end at this point.
Thank you so much, ladies. We truly appreciate you coming on. We should definitely schedule a follow-up, since we appreciate everybody coming into these sessions live. Just to remind everybody, the session was recorded. I know there were some questions regarding how can we share this session to some of our peers, and you can. So once we upload the webinar recording, will be available on our YouTube channel, and you're free to share that link to on your Facebook, with your friends, with your coworkers, whatever you need to. That resource will be up on our YouTube account roughly within 24 hours. I just wanted to thank Ijumaa, Jocelyn, and Valerie one more time for their time. The feedback on the chat was just phenomenal, with the information and the and just the overall guidance during these really, really hectic times. So I want to thank everybody again for your time and patience as we navigate these large amounts of traffic coming into Zoom. I appreciate your patience, and I hope that everybody stays safe. And I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, everybody, again.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, Fernando. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.